By all that noise, I assumed she meant the horn-happy Hicks. Still, it struck me funny, considering how quiet and still it was for most of the time we had been walking. That last pass was the first noise, apart from the echo of our footsteps, I had heard since setting out on foot. "Chuck?" Adria asked after a while. "Yeah? Do you think—" She paused, possibly wondering if she should continue, eventually deciding for it. "Do you think maybe those guys are following us because of Carlos? Like, he sent them maybe to take me back? That's crazy, right? Tell me that's crazy." I looked at her, those green eyes bright and pleading. Crazy or not, she believed it. Weed makes everyone paranoid, but this was something else. "You didn't tell him where you were going?" I asked. She shook her head. "Did you tell anyone else?" "Jacob and Sarah, no, of course. I told you that. I guess I also told Tia I was going to a wedding," she responded after some deliberation. "I didn't say where or whose, but maybe he found out. I don't have that many friends having weddings right now." "Okay, maybe," I said. "But even if so, he couldn't have known the route we were taking, and that yellow truck was ahead of us when we took this turn. I'm sure it's just a coincidence, really. Anyways, don't you think they would have tried something already if that was perhaps it was just a fuck you from the universe, that it occurred just as I was trying to be reassuring and reduce paranoia? But it was at that moment that the rednecks came back for yet another pass. They honked, as per usual, but without the unintelligible shouting this time. They did manage to scare the living shit out of us, of course. "Okay, so maybe Los didn't send them," Adria said, after they had once again departed. "But that's what, the 6th time they've done this?" "Yeah," I agreed, scowling. "Something like that. Did you happen to catch what they shouted at us the time before?" "Not really," she said. "I think it was something like 'stand clear,' like maybe they wanted us to get off the road and stop interfering with their joyriding. Who cares? They're assholes." "No argument there," I concurred. Another silence followed, and I placed my attention on putting one foot in front of another for a while. I tried to think back to the last time I was in a pickle of this magnitude. The closest I could come up with happened when I was maybe 10, 11 years old. The incident occurred during a school field trip to the Gage Park Zoo. We took the zoo train to the playground area to have a picnic lunch. Afterwards, the kids were allowed to play on the playground equipment for half an hour or so, and the adults were allowed to get off their feet and have a smoke over by the rose garden. In the center of the park was an enormous slide, or so it seemed in comparison to my 10-year-old stature. Instead of being a flat sheet of metal, it consisted of a line of roller bars. This made for a lightning-fast, nearly frictionless sliding experience that would never be allowed to exist today. That's not where I got into trouble, however. Underneath the hill where the aforementioned slide was situated were a system of kid-sized tunnels that ran maze-like underground. After the slide and the big cement kangaroos with the pouch you could crawl into started to lose its charm, I eventually had to try them. Through word of mouth, I heard big kids would hide in the dead ends with flashlights, making kids think they found the exit. When this happened, the light would go off, and the big kid would beat the crap out of the poor little kid who fell for it. Naturally, I believed these tales as gospel, and this combined with my natural fear of dark, enclosed spaces conspired to create a remarkably terrifying environment. I didn't encounter any flashlight-wielding thugs, but my fear of them made me suspicious of anything that looked like an exit, and thus I was trapped and disoriented for some time. When I finally found my way out of there, my class was gone. Apparently, I didn't hear the summoning whistle, and the chaperones fucked up the head count, because when I emerged into the Kansas sun, I was alone. The school had just finished a huge campaign on stranger danger, and I guess it worked. Instead of asking anyone for help, as they were all strangers, I just wandered around the rose garden for over an hour, weeping and fleeing from anyone who tried to approach me. All in all, though, this was worse. That nightmare ended when a chaperone managed to notice I was missing, backtracked, and found me maybe a dozen yards from where they left me. If my phone died before I could get the message out, I had no idea how Jacob was going to figure out where I was. I checked my phone again, tried resending the message despite the still present E, and tried calling with equal lack of success. I sighed and tucked my phone back into my pocket. The battery power was at 17%. No luck yet, I said, trying not to sound as desperate as I was beginning to feel. I'll keep trying. Adria started slightly at the sound of my voice, as though she had forgotten I was there. She shrugged at my comment. Do you get the feeling we're being watched? She asked. What? I answered. Besides by the rednecks? She shrugged. I don't know. Not really. Guess I'm just being paranoid again. Honestly, apart from them, I feel like we're the only living souls for miles around. I glanced up, hearing the telltale sound of an engine. Speak of the devil. Here they come again. On this approach, they changed their pattern somewhat. Instead of speeding by and honking, they slowed down to a crawl, watching us as they passed. Their faces were stony, impassive, perhaps unfriendly, but the driver's eyes were still hidden by sunglasses, and so it was difficult to tell for sure. We returned their watchful looks, our own expressions distinctly unfriendly and hidden by nothing. Jesus, that was scary, Adria commented after they once again disappeared around the bend. The way they slowed down, I thought they were going to jump out and drag us to their rape shack or whatever. What do they want from us? They want to get a rise out of us, I answered at once. They want us to freak out so tonight they can drink their beer and laugh about the stupid, scaredy cat city folk. That's all. If we ignore them, they'll get bored. She sighed. You're probably right. It's going to get dark soon, I think. I'll try to save my being freaked out until then. Good idea, I replied. We need to talk about something. Something good and distracting. Like what? She asked, tilting her head inquisitively. I probably don't have to tell you how much I liked her looking at me that way. Disastrous as our trip was thus far, I still found myself happy just to be around her. Let me see, I answered, and selected a classic. Okay, I got one. What's the worst you fucked up during sex? Fucking Casey Hamrick, she said at once. I laughed. No, not like bad choices or whatever. Like, what's your most embarrassing sex story? So I guess I can't keep that as my answer. She asked, Okay, but you go first. No way, I said. That's against the rules. I've got one for you, but it's really goddamn embarrassing. I can guarantee you, whatever you've got, mine is worse. Ooh, she said. How exciting. All right, let me think. While thinking of a story, I noticed she snapped her head to the right, toward the woods, shook her head slightly, and stared down at the road. After a moment, her face lit up with an idea. Okay, how's this? She ventured. So I was maybe 16 the first time I went down on somebody. He was my boyfriend. It was his birthday, and he took me out. Eat it. Fuck. I don't even remember. What's the name of that shitty Italian restaurant over by Fry Street? I thought for a second. It's been a while since I had been over there, but I had eaten at the restaurant before, and it was indeed shitty. I've had better spaghetti out of a can. Barry's, I said at last. It's called something else now, but I'm pretty sure it was called Barry's at that point. Yeah, she said. That sounds right. Anyway, so he paid for dinner, right? And it was his birthday, so, I don't know, I felt like I kind of owed him something. Sure, I said. I wish someone ever felt like they owed me a blowjob, but this was no time for bitterness. So we're in his car, just kind of hanging out, you know. There was a bit of a lull in the conversation, so I start getting sort of handsy. We made out for a bit, and I sort of unbuttoned his pants and yanked it out. That's hot, I interjected. Just wait, she said, smiling in a sort of embarrassed way. The story takes a major turn for the heinous. So yeah, I start going down on him. I didn't know what I was doing, really, but I was trying my best not to show it. I wanted to try to, you know, take it all in, like they do in the pornos and all. God, this is so bad. Okay, so imagine me kind of still in my seat and bent over him kind of awkwardly, right? Yeah, I gotcha, I said, wondering where this was going. So, long story short, sort of threw up on his dick. Oh God, I cried. And I don't mean like a little spit up or something. Remember, I had just been at Barry's. I had, I think, some lasagna, some breadsticks, a bit of salad. I threw up a lot. It was all over his lap, all over his seat, everywhere. So naturally, he throws up all over the back of my head. I run out of the car screaming and dripping. Chases after me, his puke-covered dick still out and flopping around. Oh Jesus, this is the worst story ever. He slipped on the dick puke, I think, and got a concussion. So what did he do for your birthday? I asked fatuously, laughing. She laughed with me, although her face was bright red. Okay, laughing boy, she said. A challenge in her eyes topped that. I think I can, actually, I said. This was, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago. I was seeing this girl for a while, and for various health reasons, she couldn't take birth control, and she couldn't risk getting pregnant. She had gotten hit by a car, and it destroyed some of her organs, so yeah. So I always had to wear a condom when we had sex. This was before I figured out I needed to be wearing larger than standard size condoms. Oh, she said, teasing. Her eyes seemed to say a little something else, but maybe that was just wishful thinking. I know it sounds like I just threw that in to brag or something, I said somewhat defensively, but I swear it's relevant to the story. I believe you, she said in a voice that suggested that this remained to be seen. Honestly, I said. It is. Well, kind of is. So anyway, she invites me to come with her to this New Year's party at some friend's house out of town. Turned out to be a pretty lame party. More of a gathering, really. It was just us and a few other people. We had both been drinking a bit, so her friend lets us sleep on their couch. So after they go to bed, we start making out a bit, and it becomes pretty clear she wants to fuck on her friend's couch. How adventurous, Adria said with the return of her wry smile. Yeah, so, you know, it's getting hot and heavy. I had a condom with me for just such an occasion, and so I slip it on. So as per usual, it's too tight, and so it's sort of difficult to stay fully hard. That combined with being sort of drunk made the sex sort of difficult. So I was basically working to just kind of get off. It was taking forever, and I was pretty worried about getting caught. Finally, I think the magic is going to happen. Turns out, just had to piss. So instead of coming, I just sort of... No, Adria cried. Yeah, I just sort of pissed in the condom. I couldn't make myself stop. So basically, I just sort of made a water balloon of piss. She looks down and says, what's that? Ha ha ha. What did you tell her? She asked. Well, I replied, I didn't tell her anything because it was about that time that the condom fell off. So I wound up giving her like splash mountain of golden showers. We're talking drenched. The couch was ruined. We didn't want to stay there for the aftermath, so we just sort of slipped off in the night. After she kind of washed off the piss as best she could. She didn't talk to me the entire ride home, and we broke up shortly thereafter. There was a lot of talk about incompatibility and all that, but I know it was because of the piss. Between mad peals of laughter, Adria said, Oh, Jesus. Pretty bad, huh? No, she replied, her face at least as red as mine. Well, yeah, but it's not that. Now I have to pee. So go then, I said. I probably won't look. What? Right here, on the side of the road? Forget it. Maybe you won't look, but the second I squat down, that's when those fucking rednecks are gonna drive by, I know it. Yeah, probably. Well, what about the woods? I offered. I'm sure you can duck behind a tree and get some privacy. Unless it's hunting season. Adria bit her lip and peered out into the rapidly darkening woods. Troubled. I couldn't blame her. Nobody wants to get bit on the taint by a rattlesnake while they're trying to take a whiz. At least I think nobody wants that. There's a lot of weird kinks out there. I guess, she said at last, turning toward the embankment. For lack of a better option. Damn, I wish I knew how close to a gas station we were, or at least somewhere I won't have to wipe my hoo-ha with a leaf. I'll wait here, I promised. Good luck, and remember, leaflets 3, let it be. Don't want to get poison ivy on your hoo-ha. Okay, she said, making her way down to the tree line. I'll bear that in mind. With this, she disappeared into the woods. For a while, I could hear her shuffling through the bed of old leaves, but soon these sounds faded to nothingness, and all was quiet and still. I scanned up and down the road as far as I could see, but gave up on this activity, as neither direction offered much of a view. Would it have killed them to just cut straight through the goddamn woods and not zigzag for 30 or 40 miles up hills and down valleys? I was sure as the crow flew there couldn't have been more than 10 miles between the highways. Well, actually, truth be told, I was certain of exactly nothing at that point. For all I knew, 100 miles from here, this road would end in a sign that said, "Fuck you, Charlie." Could be that's just what those joyriding hicks were doing out here. Sign maintenance. Expecting this line of thinking would summon those bastards, I kept a watchful eye open and listened for the sound of their engine, as familiar to me at that point as was the beating of my own heart. Or damn near. Something told me if they saw me here alone, the encounter would go very differently. Could be dangerous. So far, though, nothing. I glanced out at the woods where Adria had departed. What's taking her so long? I wondered. Probably nothing, I decided. She's probably just looking for the right spot, somewhere level where she was somewhat less likely to topple over into her own piss. I fished my phone out of my pocket and checked the time. as I failed to check the time before she went in. This was a useless gesture, but it was something to do. The battery was sitting at 15%. The signal indicator still displayed an E. I tried calling anyway, but to no avail. With a sigh, I stuffed the phone back into my pocket. "I'm back," Adria called from the tree line, startling me. I didn't hear her come up. "What do you want? You scared the piss out of me." "I did?" I asked, genuinely perplexed. "How did I do that?" "I've been standing here quietly since you left." Adria paled slightly. No mean feat, as she was fairly pale in the first place. "Don't bullshit me," she said. I think she meant to be stern, but a slight quaver in her voice belied her intent. "I shit you not," I insisted. "I haven't made a peep." She frowned, confusion mingling with fear. "What about those rednecks? Did they come back?" Of the rednecks, there was no sign, I told her. "Why? What happened?" She shook her head, more as if to dismiss her megrims than my question. Saying nothing, she started walking down the road. I followed, also saying nothing, waiting for her to explain or not. "Maybe it was nothing," she said at last, without conviction. I was so sure I would hear something that maybe my mind was just playing tricks. I said nothing, hoping she would proceed on her own. She did. I walked out far enough into the woods that I could no longer see you, maybe another 15 or 20 feet, until I found a likely spot. I was in the process of slipping off my pants, and I started hearing this shuffling sound. "Like someone walking through the dead leaves?" I asked. "Exactly," she replied. "At first, I thought it was like a fox or a bear or something like that." "Some kind of animal," I suggested. "Yeah." So I kind of looked around, and I didn't see anything. I figured it had to be the wind, or something harmless, like a rabbit or a squirrel. So I have a squat, and commence my business. Well, right about the moment my piss hit the leaves, I hear that shuffling sound again, and with it comes some sort of muttering sound, like hearing someone talk in the next room. But you can't quite make out the words. "Whoa," I said. "Yeah, I know. Well, I wasn't too scared because I figured it was you, like you were trying to find me, and you were muttering to yourself or something. Then I heard my name, clear as day, over and over again. Adria, Adria, Adria. Kinda loud too. Honestly, I'm surprised you couldn't hear it." I started getting really freaked out, but I was still pretty sure you were just fucking with me. "So please, tell me you were just fucking with me. Tell me it was you." "I wish I could," I told her, and meant it. If she was as close to the tree line as she said, and if the voice was as loud as she thought, probably should have been able to hear it. Perhaps not, but I was starting to wonder if Adria wasn't losing her mind. Ever since we started walking, she seemed nervous and edgy. It wasn't just those assholes in the yellow truck. It was as if she was listening to conversations and looking visitors only she could see. Maybe I was just being hard on her, though. It was a frightening situation to be stranded like this. Anyone would be jumping at shadows. "You were probably right earlier when you said you were just hearing things," I told her. "You didn't see any, like, tracks or something?" She shook her head. "You didn't see any movement in the trees, like someone was dashing away or watching you or something?" She seemed to consider the question. "No," she answered, lengthening the word in such a way as to suggest that this wasn't entirely true. "Are you sure?" "Well," she trailed off. "Promise you won't think I'm just being a dumb, scared girl or something." "Yeah," I replied, And since that sounded insincere, I added, I promise. Okay, well, I didn't see anything then. It kind of sounded like the voice was coming from behind me, which would have been in your direction. So on the other side of the tree, I was leaning against. I nodded. If that was so, I should definitely have been able to hear something. I left the way I came in, and all I saw were the tracks I left. So no, I didn't see anything while I was in the woods. Not that that means there wasn't somebody there. She shot me a challenging look. I looked back at her impassively. Anyways, yeah, I didn't see anyone while I was in the woods, but I thought about her anxious glances, watching the tree line. But while we were walking, yeah, she said, looking down to the road at her feet, it's been like, have you ever seen movement out of the corner of your eye? Only when you look there isn't anything there. Sure, I replied. Well, ever since we ran out of gas, it's been happening a lot, like almost constantly. Sometimes I feel like I can almost see what it is, but those woods are just so goddamn thick. And dark, I added. Yeah, exactly. She fell silent for a moment and said, I keep telling myself it's nothing, that I'm just scared of being out here and jumping at shadows. I nodded again. She turned to me and smiled wanly. Let's not talk about it anymore, okay? She asked. Sure, yeah, I agreed and smiled back at her. Good idea. She slipped her hand into mine, and I managed not to gasp. Instead, I gave it a light squeeze and was glad to see her smile grow somewhat less wan. I'm glad you're here, Chuck, she told me. Couldn't have handled this on my own. I'm glad you're here too, I answered. I know this trip has been kind of a bust, but Adria dropped my hand suddenly and turned around, looking back the way we came. Hold that thought, she told me, scowling. Those assholes are coming back. Sure enough, as soon as I turned to look, I heard the sound of their engine. Adria ducked to the ground. To what purpose I did not know at the time. I was watching the truck, though I knew it would be better to ignore them. They came tearing around the corner in their banana-yellow monstrosity, headlights and roof lights now blazing. As soon as we were in their sights, they slowed to a crawl, watching us intensely as they passed. Adria cocked her right hand back as their taillights came into view and revealed her reason for ducking earlier. She pitched a fair-sized chunk of asphalt in their general direction, somehow managing to ding a good one off their back bumper. Nice shot, I muttered as the truck screeched to a stop. Adria bellowed a torrent of profanity in their general direction that was both grandiose in scale and inventive in variety. I would have been impressed if I wasn't so busy wondering if I could possibly win in a fight against two angry hillbillies. Ultimately, I decided the likelihood of their having guns made this a moot point and prepared myself to flee screaming into the forest. Defying all of my expectations, they instead elected to flee. All screeching tires kicked up road dust. I watched them go, dumbfounded, as Adria's tirade tapered off. What the fuck was that? I asked rhetorically. Don't know, don't care, Adria declared. I'm just glad they're gone, and I only hope we find the smoking wreckage of this stupid yellow truck around the next bend. Along with a payphone, I added. And a highway, she contributed. And some place to get a hamburger that isn't made from people. This managed to get a laugh from her, and I was glad. It was my hope that if I could keep her laughing like that, she would forget about hillbillies and disembodied voices and other such horrors. Maybe she would even forget about how quickly the sun was setting. As soon as this thought crossed my mind, I began to realize how true it was. The thick press of trees already left their shadows across the entire road and on into the opposite embankment. The sun was nothing more than a gleaming sliver visible over the horizon. Nightfall was coming. We walked on down that seemingly endless country road, sharing stories and remembering old times, what few we had together, and those that involved our mutual friends. We were both cautious to keep the conversation light, and we did our level best to ignore the increasingly perilous situation we were in. The crisp air grew colder, and she put her arm around me for warmth, holding me close. It made the walking more difficult, but contrarily more enjoyable. Not once in a space of 40 minutes or more did our friends in the yellow submarine make an appearance. I allowed myself to believe that they were through hounding us. I remember the first time I saw her. Adria, I mean. It was only a couple of years ago. There was a trend going around of throwing backyard parties disguised as art shows. Local artists would display their work. Local bands would perform until the cops received enough noise complaints to put a stop to it, and the patrons would mingle around and sip cheap keg beer from that most ubiquitous of party accessories, the red Solo Cup. It was at one such show, hosted by a local, celebrity isn't the right word. He was the sort of guy you never failed to run into at the bar or a party or a show. Doesn't matter. Not the point. I didn't really know him. His name was Billy something or another, and he had a house and was a hipster, so of course he had to host one of these trendy backyard art shows. This was in the declining years of a relationship of mine that started promising but was by then in freefall. I agreed to go to the party with her, but did in no way agree to hang out the entire time. This arrangement was agreeable to her, and we quickly split up. She departed to see the gallery, and I sought out the stage to identify the source of the horrific clamor. The clamor belonged, as it turns out, to my old buddy Julian and his short-lived pop-punk band Teasley Lane. Jules was at the mice belting out the end of a song that was, near as I could tell, entitled Kicked in the Nuts. This was followed by a Blink 182 cover, which was subsequently followed by another Blink 182 cover. Both were competent imitations, which, if you know the work of Blink 182, you know how little that says for Teasley Lane. Their most redeeming qualities were a talented drummer and Julian's own manic enthusiasm. Anyways, the crowd, already edging past tipsy, seemed to enjoy it. A small, half-hearted mosh pit formed during Teasley Lane's finale, an original composition by Julian. Not a bad song all around, although I can't for the life of me remember the name. I joined the pit with gusto, taking some licks and dishing out more. Someone's elbow scored a lucky hit off my temple area, and I decided it was high time to sit down. I ambled dazedly to a clear spot of grass and sat there waiting for my head to clear. Moments later, as I was rubbing my temples, a voice came from out of left field saying, "Want a cigarette?" "Yeah, thanks," I said, looking up to see a pair of green eyes that made me wish I was single, or more so than I already did. "Here you go," she said, handing me an American native. "I'm Adria." "I'm Charlie," I told her, accepting a cigarette I didn't really want after all, and lighting it in spite of myself. "I'm sorry about earlier," she told me, and noting my perplexed expression, added, "It was my elbow that knocked you in the head. It was an accident, I swear." "Nah," I said, which would have been the same response I would have given if she apologized for running over my dick with a wheat thresher. Don't get in the pit if you don't want to be hit. That's what I actually never said before. She laughed and said, Really though, I am sorry. That's my friend Julian's band. I guess I was just sort of getting into the spirit, or whatever. Before I could tell her what a marvelous coincidence it was that Julian was my friend too, my girlfriend came storming up. She was pissed off about something or another. I don't remember or care what. Only that it meant it was time for us to leave. I quickly said goodbye, and she waved back with a smile, leaving me to wonder what might have been. It was on the tip of my tongue to reminisce with Adria over this very event. I was eager to know if she remembered the encounter and if she felt the same spark potential between us. That's about the time I realized her arm was no longer wrapped around my waist. In fact, she was gone. My heart lurched and chugged, just like my car before it died. Only it didn't stop. It raced. Chills ran courses through my entire body, and for the first time in what seemed like hours, I was aware of my surroundings. I was terrified, as much by what I saw as by Adria's sudden disappearance. I stood at the crest of a hill, and the valley below was shrouded in fog, thicker than any I have ever seen, and stretching as far as the eye could see. I was fortunate only in that the moon was full, but the light it provided only served to expose the terrible truth. I was alone. I was lost. She was gone. Of these three truths, it was the third that edged me into full-blown panic. I promised I would stay with her. Well, maybe not in so many words, but I turned back the way I had come, trying my level best to look in every direction at once, bellowing her name all the while. To my left and right were steep embankments, the hill crest a narrow plateau with drops in all directions. She could have gone anywhere. Adria, I cried, praying to a god I didn't precisely believe in that she was still close enough to hear me. Adria, where are you? There was a sound, just barely audible in the pause between one Adria and the next. If the wind was blowing, I would never have heard the sound, which was something between a sigh and a sob. It had to have been her. My head jerked in the direction I considered most likely to be the origin, down the left embankment. I rushed across the street and peered out into the woods, though they were as shrouded in mist as they were in total darkness. There, just at the tree line, dark a smudge in the fog, barely qualifying as a humanoid shape. It was her. I knew it. Before my mind could give the signal, I found my feet already negotiating the steep embankment, half tumbling and half sliding. It was a wonder I didn't fall and break my neck. Come on, she called from the darkness. I could almost see her beckoning. I have something to show you. I'm coming, I cried back to her. Don't go anywhere. 2 steps from the tree line, I felt a tug at my right arm in the process of a backswing. My feet, so steady before, slipped on the slick grass, and I crashed to the ground, along with my attacker. I leapt to my feet, prepared for a fight, and came face to face with Adria. Don't go in there, she whispered, eyes big as saucers gleaming in the moonlight. Please stay. Adria? I gasped, dumbfounded. What? What happened? Come on, she said, tugging my arm. We need to get back on the road. Right. Yeah. We scrambled back up the incline, both of us throwing nervous glances over our shoulders. That shadowy smudge I was so certain belonged to Adria was gone, and the voice with it. My head swam with confusion and fear, fading panic, spent adrenaline. It was a wonder I didn't faint and go tumbling back. What happened back there? Adria demanded, as we stepped back onto the relative safe haven of the road. I told you I was stopping to tie my shoe, and the next thing I know, you were gone. Where? When? I asked, more confused than ever. At the top of the hill, right before it dropped downhill again. I told you I was stopping, and when I looked back up, you had disappeared on me. Right before the drop, I interjected. Impossible. That's where I realized she wasn't with me. Yeah. At first, I thought you had already gone down the hill, and I couldn't see you in the fog. Then I heard your voice from the trees. I ran over to see, and you were standing there by the edge of the trees, but I saw a shape in the woods, and from it, I heard a voice. Your voice. You said, "Come on," I guessed. "I have something to show you." She bit her lip, hard, and drew blood that gleamed black in the moonlight. She swayed a bit, like maybe she was going to faint, and I held her steady. Frowning, I told her, "When I heard it, it was your voice. I'm sure of it." She looked down into the woods again. There was nothing to see, or at least there was nothing I could see. "What is going on here?" she asked, wiping the blood from her lip with the heel of her palm. "Let's sit down for a minute," I suggested. Adria glanced down the road, seeing the fog bank we were moments from walking into. She nodded. The hill was steep, and the only way to sit comfortably was to face the road ahead. "Do you have any more of those cigarettes?" I asked her. She nodded, produced the pack. Her hands were too shaky to light the cigarettes together, like last time. In the end, she had to pass me both to light for her. I managed the trick, and we sat in silence, smoking as I turned the situation over in my head. The smoke was harsh as ever, and my mouth was so damn dry, but it worked to calm my nerves a bit. She leaned in close to me, so close I could smell the lingering scent of shampoo in her hair, mingled with the perspiration and the sharp reek fear leaves in its wake. I put my arm around her, and she leaned her head on my shoulder. I could hear her breath hitching, and even without looking at her face, I could tell she was crying. I felt a bit like crying myself. We had been driving down this road for 45 minutes or more. Our speed, I estimated, averaged at about 40 miles per hour. My math wasn't great, but I estimated by that figure we had to have traveled at least 25, 30 miles, maybe less, considering all the sharp turns and all. Call it 20. That's a lot of country road, especially for having no apparent purpose like this one. I saw no side roads that could have led to hunting lodges, logging companies, farmland, satanic churches, nothing. The only purpose this road could have served would have been to cut from one highway to another, or from one highway to another small shithole town. Our process on foot was a lot slower, of course, but we had been walking for hours on end. Not once could I recall seeing another truck aside from the yellow truck, and even it had been absent for an hour or more. That was strange, but not outside of the realm of possibility. What was perhaps stranger was, now that I thought of it, I couldn't remember the last time I had even seen a roadside sign. No speed limit, no curve ahead, and of course, there should have been plenty of those. No 10 miles to fuck Neckville signs. Nothing. It was like the state had this road paved and then promptly forgot about it. Adria's question floated through my mind over and over again. What is going on here? Look, I said, breaking the silence. I felt Adria stiffen momentarily, and she looked up at me. We're both tired, dehydrated, and scared. Delirious, probably. Can we agree that whatever happened at the top of the hill was just our imaginations running wild? She seemed to consider this. Yeah, she said at last. Yeah, it must have been. It's just, how did we hear the same exact thing? I don't know, I told her emphatically. And it doesn't matter. What matters is getting off this road and getting some help. Come on, I should try my phone again at the top of the hill. Maybe on high ground like that, I can get a signal. She nodded, and we both rose to our feet. My feet and back argued vocally against this action, but were summarily ignored. The crest of the hill was some 10 yards behind us, and as I turned to face it, I saw a humanoid shape standing at the top, silhouetted against the night sky. Just a flash, and then it was gone. Somehow, I managed to convince myself it was never there. If Adria noticed anything amiss, she gave no sign of it. Once I found myself on level ground, I pulled out my phone. I cleared the notification telling me I was at 10% battery life and found my first bit of good news in hours. The E was replaced with a single bar of reception. Hell yeah, I exclaimed. We have signal. Adria's face lit up with excitement. Quick, she cried. Text Jacob. I opened up my messages and tapped the retry button next to my last message attempt. The bar of progress started its slow crawl, and I watched intently. Once again, it made it all the way to 80% in no time. Another jump, maybe 90%. Come on, I urged under my breath. Come on, send. The bar leaped once more, and the screen went black. Fuck, I cried, only just stopping myself from pitching the phone off into the darkness. What happened? Adria asked, dismayed. The screen went black. It might have sent, I don't know. I stabbed at the home key, hoping against hope. No such luck. The screen lit up once more, only to show a sad battery symbol. The phone is dead. God damn it. I thought I still had some juice left. It's them, she whispered. They don't want us to get out of here. They? They who? I asked, incredulous at this seeming non sequitur. She only shrugged, but the conviction never left her eyes. I thought of the shape I saw at the top of the hill, the voice in the trees. But there couldn't be anyone out there, surely. Come on, I said. Only thing we can do now is keep moving. This road must go somewhere. Must it? She asked under her breath. I stared back at her. Nothing to say. I wasn't so sure myself. Not anymore. Maybe sometimes roads go nowhere. After giving it one more look of disgust, I stuffed my useless phone back into my pocket, and we started walking again. Below us, the fog billowed and surged in the valley, a living thing as thick as smoke. In the wake of paranoia and fear, walking into that mass seemed a suicidal act, possible only through force of will. Adria stopped dead in her tracks as the first tendrils of mist reached us, stretching out as if in search of prey. I can't go in there, Chuck. I can't do it. You can, Aid. I answered, You've got to. You were able to face up to that bastard, Carlos. I don't know if I could have said the same. You're braver than you think. She chewed this over, peering into the fog. Dozens of conflicting emotions played over her face, fighting for dominance. In the end, determination won the day. Yeah, she said with no quiver to betray her. I can do this. She took my hand, looked me in the eye, and said, Don't let go. We stepped into the fog, hand in hand. I felt like Neil Armstrong must have felt when he first stepped foot on the moon, stepped onto another world. It was such a relief, I reflected, to be the voice of reassurance. So much easier when I was being brave for someone else. In a way, she was the braver one, willing to give voice and form to the fears we shared. We were quickly swallowed by the mist, and visibility dwindled to yards you could count on the fingers of one hand. The moon overhead shone no brighter than a tarnished coin laying at the bottom of a murky pool. Was it Adria's hand gripping tighter on my own, or was it the other way around? The silence was palpable here, worse even than before, oppressive, suffocating. Even so, neither of us seemed eager to speak and break it. I felt some unspoken agreement between us on the matter, as though we both knew that to give ourselves away to those who could hear would mean certain doom. But who would hear us in this lifeless place? Trees. The trees in question pressed closely upon us once again as we reached the bottom of the hill. Their spectral forms bore down like malicious giants from a Tolkien-esque fantasy. Perhaps it was they who gave me the inexplicable but unwavering sense of being watched. Perhaps, but somehow I didn't think so. Sometimes I would see shapes in the fog, darker smudges like the one that called to me on the hill, seemingly hours ago, wispy shapes whose movement caught my attention, only to disappear in the blink of an eye. I told myself that my eyes were only starved for input in the darkness and murk, that these specters could not possibly exist. I told myself this, but it was a hard sell. I could feel Adria grow tense, and I knew she saw them too. My feet carried me further down the road, seemingly of their own volition. Some frightened rabbit part of my brain was screaming to leave, to run back the way I came, and to hell with the consequences. I was able to defy it, but only with some effort. I tried to remember the person I was before the fear took over. I tried to remember the person who thought he might be able to find himself in a girl's pants with no more effort than a simple drive across state lines. I envied him and cursed him for a fool. This was the truth. The fog was the truth. The fear was the truth. The stories we told during that endless walk, the laughs we shared, the moments we remembered. We were only whistling past the graveyard. Now we were in the graveyard, and those brighter days seemed less corporeal than the wraiths that danced and watched from the spaces between the trees and the road, reality and fantasy. They aren't real, the rational portion of my brain insisted, trying to force these blue devil thoughts to the corners of my mind with limited success. I looked to Adria. Even she seemed insubstantial in the fog. Unreal. Here nothing was certain, least of all the prospect of holding hands with a beautiful woman whose eyes shone like emeralds even in this haze. She smiled at me, but the fear never left her eyes. Could she feel reality unraveling, the same as me? Her eyes darted away, and the smile faded. "Do you hear them?" she asked, softly as she could. "The whisperers?" I opened my mouth to tell her no, but before I could, the answer was made a lie. A soft susurrus that barely registered as sound, but it was there, the same as the voice that came from the woods when I lost her. I could no longer lie to myself and say it was my imagination. It came from all sides, as if they, whoever they might be, were closing in on us. The rabbit brain thrashed in its cage. "The wind," I whispered, choking on the lie. There was no wind. There never was. "It's not," she insisted. "It's them. They're coming for us." "There's no one here but us," I answered, persisting in the lie. In defiance of my denial, the apparitions grew more frequent in appearance, the sounds of their whispers threatening to form words. We were surrounded. I could no longer tell myself the murky phantoms of the mist were the product of my taxed mind, my imagination. They abandoned their furtive movements, refused to disappear. They watched. They waited. They peered at us from a distance. If indeed such things had eyes to peer. Their forms were still no more distinct than darker smudges in the gloom. "What do they want?" Adria breathed. I had no answer for her, but they did. "Come," they chanted. "Come, come." Their voices were the voices of the wind in the trees, the wind that had so far been absent from our journey. So soft it was, so ethereal, I could not tell if I heard them with my ears or with my mind. Come, come, come. My legs had become useless, leaden things. No amount of the remaining will I possessed could compel them into movement. I stood there, hand in hand with Adria, the yellow dash of the center stripe just visible at my feet. Come, come, come. It was not me I feared for, or at least so I tell myself now. It was her. It was Adria. She told me she wasn't angry with me, that she didn't blame me for running out of gas. That was sweet of her. It was my fault. All of this was my fault. I was careless, so goddamn careless. Come, come, come. They were closer now, some of them as close as the curb. Even so, their features refused to sharpen. They were no more substantial than shadows, no more real than a dream. Come, come, come. Hold on to me, I begged her. Hold me tight, and don't let me go. She did as I asked, and in return, I held her as tightly as I could. Her heart beat wildly like some animal, a rabbit, in a cage. I could feel it. Her hot breath blew across the back of my neck in hyperventilated puffs. Come, come, come. Charlie, she whispered, voice harsh with tears. I have to tell you something. I have to. The chanting stopped. Everything stopped. All but the sound of our own breath. For a moment, hung in time. She was the only thing in the world that was real to me. I don't know if the feelings I had for her were ever more than lust. I don't know if she felt anything for me at all, or was just using me to get away from Carlos. I didn't know anything, but at least I had that moment. I'm sorry, she breathed, and just like that, they took her from me. One moment she was in my arms, my fingers buried in her raven black hair. The next, she was ripped away, screaming into the night. I watched her, helpless, as those shadowy shapes writhed over her, dragging her into the fog, into the woods, into darkness. I watched her, and I screamed too. I called out her name over and over again, as though just by her name could I bring her back. I called her name until the darkness took me, and I was grateful for it. Light came back into my life with a sharp, jabbing sensation in my ribs. I groaned and turned over, feeling hard pavement supporting my aching frame. The sun blazed overhead, and I was not alone. See that? Someone said. I told you he was still alive. You owe me $5. I groaned and attempted to sit up. I felt like every muscle, joint, and tendon in my body had spent the night engaged in a bloody civil war. Adria? I said to no one in particular. Where's Adria? The girl with the tits, another voice inquired. I sat bolt upright. She wasn't with you. Are you okay? I guess, I admitted, as I took in the sight of my rescuers. It was none other than the rednecks from the yellow truck. The yellow truck itself was parked at the curbside, the doors hanging open. A bell could be heard faintly, ringing from within. Ding, 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 ding. My head ached. Then I guess we'd better take you in to see Sheriff Carson, the larger redneck grumbled, sounding as if maybe he had something better to do. Lesson we want to catch hell from him later. Get in the truck, Rooster Boy instructed. You'll be sitting, bitch. Along the way to this Sheriff Carson, The two rednecks explained to me their intentions the day before. They told me it was not their intention to scare us. They were only trying to help without interfering. When darkness came, they had to leave that road. It had nothing to do with that little rock your girlfriend pitched, except that now we had her taint on us. I didn't ask them what they thought they would be interfering with, or what they meant by taint. I didn't ask them anything. I just sat and looked ahead, trying to let the reality of the previous night's events fade away like dreams do after waking. They wouldn't, not a bit. That last moment, when those things ripped her away from me, played in my head over and over again. My throat ached too, stripped raw, as a matter of fact. From the screaming, I guessed. I related my story to Sheriff Carson, a red-eyed country sheriff cliché whose tin-starred brown uniform appeared ill-equipped to hold back his sloping landslide of a gut. He nodded and chewed a soggy toothpick through the entire story, interrupting only occasionally to ask a question for clarification, or to urge me along. The rednecks backed me up as far as they were able, but of course were absent for the more fantastical elements, and were therefore useless. My story told, I leaned back in my cheap plastic chair. It was the sort any elementary school student would have been familiar with, and I had the aching back to prove it. The sheriff looked at me levelly, and I expected him to tell me I was full of shit, that I killed the girl, and that I would be staying in their finest concrete accommodations until such time as they could prove it. Instead, he surprised me by standing up, a monumental effort on its own, crossing around his desk and squeezing my shoulder in an unexpected gesture of empathy. "Forget about her, son," he told me, blowing beery wind in my direction. "She's gone. Crossed over. It's a thin place, that road. There are doors there the likes of you and me don't know how to open, not on purpose. If she's meant to come back, she will. You did. Now go on back home." In the end, I managed to heed half his advice. I bummed a ride, this time from one of his deputies, maybe his only deputy, back to my car. The deputy in question was almost a technicolor facsimile of that googly-eyed deputy from the Andy Griffith Show, if a couple decades younger. He filled my gas tank with a 5-gallon drum, left me the directions to the nearest service station, and left like his hair was on fire and his arse was catching. I myself wasted no time saying goodbye to the place. The car started with an angry hitch, and I managed to turn the car around without getting stuck in the ditch or anything. Half an hour later, I was back on the highway. 5 more hours later, I was in my home. Maybe a week later, I was finished giving lie-festooned answers to awkward questions from everyone I knew. The official story I gave, developed on that long ride home, was roughly as follows. We got lost, ran out of gas, and had to walk to the nearest gas station. Once there, she elected to take a bus home. That, I told them, was the last I saw of her. Believable enough, I suppose. Her parents were furious, of course, but that was nothing to me. All I needed to do was move on with my life. To this end, I was somewhat successful. I went back to my apartment, worked at my shitty job, and spent as little time possible thinking. I even met other women, dated, formed relationships. For a few of them, I developed feelings that were, if not love, something very much like it. It never lasted. Eventually, I would think of those haunting green eyes, that wry smile that accepted no bullshit and offered none in return. The way her hair felt in my fingers in those last terrible moments. Her smell. Things would thereafter quickly fall apart. There would be other reasons, excuses, angry words, and accusations. But it was her. Only her. A memory of a girl who in the end I barely knew. I hoped her memory would fade, as I hoped the essential reality of the unreal events that transpired would. Forget her, son. She's gone. There was a time those words, earnestly given, still angered me. What did he know about it? He wasn't there. He didn't see those phantasmal entities surround us, didn't hear the voices call for her, didn't see them tear her away into the sky, like the Wendigo of Inuit legend. He wasn't the one left behind. Finally, I returned to that old Ozarks road. Took me ages to find it. I drove a ways down that twisting, turning, lonely road and pulled over when I found a wide spot in the road. From there, I set out on foot. It was almost dark again when I found the hill that descended into the fog. I listened for the voices in the trees, watched from the corners of my eyes for their furtive shapes. Until dawn broke, I stood there, staring into the wilderness and waiting. I thought that at least if I couldn't get her back, maybe they would take me too. But they never came. Eventually, I gave up, and I walked back to my car, head down and hands in my pockets. Nothing to show for my pilgrimage. I knew that fat old sheriff was right, even if he didn't know what he was talking about. There were doors out there. Because I didn't know how to find them, that didn't mean they weren't there. Maybe Adria and I weren't meant to be together like in some kind of fairy tale, but she was too damn tough to give in to those shadow people. She would find a door that would take her back here, and maybe then I would see her again, offering a smile and a cigarette. Until then, all I can do is wait.